Okay, so welcome everybody to this installment of the seminar series here at the Institute of Astrophysics. Today we have the great pleasure to have with us Dr. Jed McKinney. Jed got his PhD at University of Massachusetts. And after that, he moved a year and a half ago to be a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Texas at Austin. Jed is interested mainly in on the role of dust in the growth and evolution of galaxies, and how it can be used to constrain the physical nature of these galaxies, the star formation that they host, and also the active galactic nuclei they can harbor. So, Jed, whenever you want, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you for the introduction, Tanya. It's really nice to be here talking to you all. Thanks for signing on at 5 p.m. in the evening to hear a talk. I really appreciate it. And I'm really excited to talk to you today about the work that we've been doing here at UT Austin on searching for distant galaxies and uncovering their dust reservoirs and understanding that the role that that dust plays in shaping the evolution of these galaxies. So I'm predominantly an extragalactic astronomer. I met Tanya studying, local luminous infrared galaxies, at z=0. And broadly, I'm interested in understanding how this question of how galaxies are formed in the very early universe and how they evolve, stitching together their trends over cosmic time. This is an intrinsically challenging process because it means we need to understand physics on multiple scales, right? So we need to have a good understanding of how star formation plays out on the scales of giant molecular clouds and the interstellar medium. And then we need to contextualize that within these the environments of these larger galaxies that they reside within. And then, of course, galaxies cluster along the large scale structure of the universe, which plays an equally important role. So it's a multi-scale process. It's very challenging, and one of the things that makes this extra difficult but extra interesting in my mind is that these galaxies are filled with this stuff called dust. And historically, this has posed a problem for observations at optical and UV wavelengths, trying to get representative samples of galaxies and an unbiased, census of star formation over the history of the universe. So that's why I really take this approach of directly observing dust, refining models, and using that to better understand the way that galaxies grow over time. So I'm excited to step off into this distant and dusty universe together. But before I do that, I want to build some context locally. Okay. And here we go. Right. So this is Barnard 68. This is a well-known molecular cloud in the Milky Way, about 125 parsecs away. And you can see this great void where the light from the background stars is not apparent to us in the optical. And this is, of course, because dust that's in this molecular cloud. If you go to slightly longer wavelengths in the near infrared, that lets you, see through this dust to some degree. But of course, we need to correct for that dust attenuation to derive the accurate properties of stars in the background, behind this cloud. But then moving to even longer wavelengths, like in the far infrared, this dust now shines directly. And so we can look at the dust in emission. This is a Herschel map of Barnard 68. So all that's to say is that dust not only provides an absolutely critical context for observations at all wavelengths, we need to correct for it at the UV optical and even into the near infrared, but it's also a direct probe of, for instance, the cold interstellar medium. So it lets us study the phases of gas that precede star formation, for instance. So it's both something that we need to understand in order to contextualize all wavelengths, and it's something we can observe directly. So when I talk about dust, I'm referring to basically carbonations carbonaceous and silicate compounds. These range, from as small as angstrom scale polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, so complex planar rings of carbon, all the way up to micron scale conglomerates, complicated molecules. And it's really interesting because the precise blend of these different types of dust, their composition and their properties, is actually really uncertain, especially in distant galaxies. What does the dust look like? How is it charged? These are important questions to answer because dust is really everywhere in galaxies, and it's profoundly shaping the way that we observe them. So this is M64, a local galaxy. This is the Hubble image, and you can see, that this galaxy harbors lots of star formation, but most notably, we see these distinct and striking attenuation bands because of the dust in this galaxy. And so just to orient you, though, the dust is less than 1% of the total mass of this galaxy, far less. But it's having a completely disproportionate role in shaping the way this galaxy appears to us, especially in the rest frame UV optical. Dust is also something that we now see directly in emission with telescopes like James Webb. This is a JWST image of M83, a local barred spiral. And everything that's lit up here in red and orange is the filamentary structure of the interstellar medium being traced by the emission from dust grains. And you can see that it's spread over the galaxy and even concentrated in the nucleus of this galaxy. So dust is everywhere. Again, we can see it both absorbing light, but also in exquisite detail with JWST and emission. Dust is also critical for understanding galaxies like this. This is NGC 7469, one of the many galaxies in the GOALS survey, which many people, Tanyo included on this call, participate in. And this galaxy harbors a supermassive black hole that is actively growing in the center. That's in part the point source that you see in the center of this galaxy. But there's still dust across the spiral arms of this galaxy. And if you zoom in to the nucleus, you see a star-forming ring, again, obscured by dust. And then in the center, a growing supermassive black hole deeply embedded in a natal dust cloud. And so dust is important on all scales in galaxies, down to the nucleus, obscuring the growth of supermassive black holes, but also out into the disks where a lot of star formation happens. Okay, so dust is everywhere in galaxies, but I've talked right now about galaxies in the local universe. What about those very distant from us? So this is an iconic image. I love starting with this image in my talks. It's the Hubble Deep Field, released in 1996. And this image really launched a lot of extragalactic science, particularly about the evolution of galaxies, because in this image, we see hundreds of galaxies, many of which are so distant that we're catching their light, and seeing these galaxies as they were billions of years into the past. And by studying galaxies at progressively greater and greater distances, we're looking further back into the history of the universe, and we can stitch together, evolutionary trends, because we can't, for instance, observe one galaxy and watch how it changes and evolves over time. That's a timescale far, far greater than our human lifespans. But we can make these representative samples of galaxies at different distances or look back times, ages of the universe, and try to connect the dots to understand how galaxies grow and evolve over time. Right, so this is the Hubble Deep Field. It's a near-infrared image. But we've known actually for about 50 years, a little more, that this is an incomplete picture of the universe. So what I'm showing you here is the extragalactic background. This is all the light in the night sky that's coming from sources out of the Milky Way. And you can see in gray is the cosmic microwave background, the afterglow of the Big Bang. But what I'm highlighting here is the cosmic optical background in blue, which is the energy from unobscured starlight, that's stars not covered by dust, and the cosmic infrared background, that is the energy from dust. And that dust is being heated mostly by stars, right? So these stars live in these dusty cocoons. and also growing supermassive black holes. And the point here is that these two backgrounds, the optical and the infrared background, tracing both dust unobscured and dust obscured stars, are approximately equal. So what that means is that images like this are intrinsically encoding only about 50% of the information that we need to understand galaxy formation. We have to complement these surveys in the near infrared, tracing the rest UV optical of high redshift galaxies with observations at long wavelengths. And so a few years after the Hubble Deep Field was released, an equally iconic image came out. This is the 850 micron map of the HDF taken by Scuba. And this reveals an incredible amount of information about galaxies, predominantly the fact that they're really quite luminous in the far infrared, suggesting lots of dust-obscured star formation. One of the most striking results of this work actually was that HDF 851, which is actually the brightest source in the 850 Scuba map of the HDF. That's that bright node in the center. That's the most luminous galaxy in the Hubble Deep Field. And it's not detected by Hubble. It took 15 years to uncover the counterpart to this massive and dusty star-forming galaxy at high redshift. So clearly we need these complementary views, a multi-wavelength perspective to have a well-rounded approach to understanding galaxy evolution. So given that we have these perspectives now from many telescopes, both on the ground and in space, I'm just going to review a few key tenets of extragalactic astronomy, so particularly related to galaxy evolution, so some major things that we know. And what we know is well summarized by this figure. So this is the star formation rate density as a function of redshift on the x-axis, or equivalently, the time since the Big Bang. That's on the top x-axis. And what this y-axis really is if you go into some representative volume of the universe and you look at all the galaxies and you count out how many new stars they're forming each year. That's this rate. And you can see an interesting story. That at high redshifts, at early cosmic times, the cosmic star formation rate density began to increase, and it peaks at a redshift of about 1 to 3, and then it begins to decline. For most of this period, star formation is overwhelmingly obscured by dust. But you do need the unobscured component in part to understand star formation in the early universe, maybe when there was a lot less dust, but also as a non-negligible component today. So you need these complementary views of the universe, and they tell us that star formation really ramped up to about redshifts of around 1 to 3, the so-called cosmic noon, where galaxies were forming more stars than at any other time. And then after that epoch, something is happening to galaxies. They are shutting down their star formation on average. Maybe they're running out of fuel. Maybe certain feedback processes are playing an important role in shutting down that star formation. But it eventually declines to the current rates today. And this is a real central paradigm in the study of galaxy evolution. Launches many open questions. Why are the star formation rates peaking at redshift 2? What shut them down to reach the levels today? To what extent are galaxies forming stars behind these dusty veils in the earlier universe? These are all really interesting questions and really major questions in galaxy evolution right now. So this little flow chart summarizes some of the major questions that I'm personally really interested in right now. So starting from the left, the top left, there's a core assumption when we look at dust in distant galaxies that dust is more or less the same to what we find in the universe today, both in the Milky Way and nearby star-forming galaxies. That's a really serious source of uncertainty that we need observational diagnostics to go test, what that dust actually looks like and understand how that impacts the way it obscures light and also traces star formation. Moving to the top right, we don't understand why those dust-obscured star formation rates are so high at redshifts 1 to 3. It's difficult to explain those star formation rates given the amount of gas that's in galaxies. So there has to be some change in the mode of star formation that we don't fully understand. Moving to the bottom right, we don't know when the first dust reservoirs are growing in galaxies. So this has really interesting implications for the rise of metals in the early universe and the role that dust is playing in building some of the most massive galaxies within the first billion years of the universe. And then moving to the bottom left, the coupling between dust and supermassive black holes is actually a very difficult process. And we don't quite understand in particular how that extends to the host galaxy, right? So how are supermassive black holes deeply embedded by dust also impacting the environments on kiloparsec scales, for instance, in disks? So all of these questions kind of circle around the central idea of explaining how galaxies grow and evolve over cosmic time. If you wanted to hang around for 2 hours, I could talk about all of these, but I don't have that time. I don't want to take all your time today. So I'm just going to talk about a few of these questions. I'm going to talk about the dawn of dust and finding the first dust reservoirs in the universe. And then I'm going to talk about this central assumption about, is dust always the same? And this is really important in my mind because it really underpins almost every aspect of galaxy formation, particularly ones that touch on dust in some way. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the dawn of dust, and I'm going to talk about probes of dust and dust conditions out to the early universe. So what I mean by the dawn of dust is basically what is the role of dust in the first billion years of galaxy formation? When are those first dust reservoirs growing? And how is dust shaping the early stages, the baby steps of galaxy formation? So if you look at the star formation rate density plot again, what I want to draw your attention now is to redshifts above 4. And in particular, if you look at the scatter on this plot, there's almost 2 orders of magnitude of uncertainty. So we actually don't understand how prevalent dust-obscured star formation is, after the first billion years of galaxy formation. And even to higher redshifts, we have very little constraint on the incidence of dust-obscured star formation and the first dust reservoirs that form. This is incredibly important to understand because what dust is doing in these galaxies and understanding how much dust there is has implications, for instance, finding overmassive galaxies at redshifts greater than 7 with JWST. Those may require extraordinarily efficient star formation related to ISM physics that we don't fully understand, and actually dust plays a really key role in mediating efficient star formation. The highest redshift that one might find significant dust reservoirs at has really important implications for the production and destruction channels of dust. And in particular, is that coming from, AGB-like stars, or is it really requiring more exotic pathways? Maybe you need a lot of supernova produced dust. And that's actually really, really interesting because the different dust production channels have produced grains that have distinct attenuation laws. And so finding dust at early times and being able to place constraint on the ways that we think dust is produced will also let us make better corrections for dust in the rest frame UV optical to measure, accurate star formation rates, stellar masses, et cetera. And of course, perennially, dust is an important thing to understand at all cosmic epochs because it impacts our selection effects of optical and near-infrared surveys. We want to have representative samples of galaxies. And so we need to have an understanding of dust-obscured galaxies out to early times to make general claims about, all galaxies at any particular epoch. So the way that I am working on this problem is by pushing into the early universe and trying to find dust-obscured galaxies in the Cosmos Web survey. So Cosmos Web is a Cycle 1 survey being led by Caitlin Casey here at UT Austin. And this is this was the largest Cycle 1 program with over 200 hours of NIRCam and MIRI observations over the cosmos field. And that's what I'm showing here. You can see it's about a half square degree of contiguous NIRCam tiles, which is incredible. This is larger than all other Cycle 1 extragalactic fields combined. And what's especially great about the cosmos field is that this is a real legacy extragalactic field. And so this new and exciting and deep JWST data is being folded into a rich legacy of observations across the electromagnetic spectrum. And in particular, for this case about dusty galaxies and finding those first dust reservoirs, for me, the most important thing is that this exquisite JWST data overlaps with wide area coverage from far infrared facilities and submillimeter facilities. So here I'm showing the S2 Cosmos map. So it's the Scuba 2 map at 850 microns, surveying the Cosmos field. And if you go into this data set and you pull out all of the sources that you find, there are about 706 SMGs that are within the JWST coverage of Cosmos Web. Thanks to some recent ALMA data that we have, all of these galaxies are going to have high resolution ALMA follow-up, and that's absolutely critical for being able to assign to associate the sources that we're finding in these JWST maps with the submillimeter data that we observe with lower resolution single dish ground-based telescopes. And Cosmos Web really only recently completed. There are a few tiles that still need to be taken and revisited, but more or less the entire data set is in. And so here's a subset of that. It's really an exquisite, kind of mind-bogglingly large data product. Because in this image, you're seeing hundreds of thousands of galaxies, some very nearby, many very, very distant from us, and probing deep into the history of the universe. And you can really just keep zooming into this tile and see and reveal more and more galaxies and more in exquisite detail. And it just keeps going. So my instinct as a predominantly submillimeter, far infrared, and radio astronomer is to look at this exquisite, gorgeous near infrared data at high spatial resolution and slap some low resolution submillimeter contours over it to go diving into the and uncover the counterparts to these submillimeter galaxies. But that's a really difficult problem, and I'm going to illustrate that really quickly. It's not necessarily a new problem, it's one we know about. So here's a real zoom in on one of those submillimeter galaxies and the JWST data in the background. And you can see that there are many galaxies that JWST is finding within the extent of the submillimeter source. That's what the red contours are outlining, this kind of low resolution blob. We know there's a dust obscured galaxy or maybe more in this vicinity, but we struggle to associate that with any particular JWST counterpart because of the low submillimeter spatial resolution. So my approach to this problem is systematically using interferometers like ALMA to go in and resolve the dust emission in these submillimeter galaxies. And we find many interesting things, like this example, where we're resolving the submillimeter source into multiples. Those can sometimes be at the same redshift in some interesting merger system. Other times they're not. So just to review this methodology, we're starting from these single dish submillimeter priors from facilities like Scuba 2. We're combining that with interferometric follow-up, basically wherever I can get my hands on it. So I'm scraping the ALMA archive for any observation that's publicly available in Cosmos. We have exciting new data come in. I'm also using the VLA at 3 gigahertz. We have a very deep map, and we're using that to associate these observations with their optical and near-infrared counterparts that JWST really is allowing us to see for the first time. Many of these submillimeter galaxies had no optical or near-infrared counterpart prior to the JWST images. And with this exquisite multi-wavelength data set, we're able to extract multi-wavelength fluxes to measure the galaxy properties. We can do spatially resolved SED fitting. It's really quite exciting. And here's a montage of some of the sources that we were finding. You might recognize these. These were actually the ones that were looping through on my title slide. So you're looking at the ALMA contours over the JWST counterparts that we first found by zooming into these submillimeter galaxies. And we find many redshift 2 galaxies. That's sort of where we expect many of these sources to lie. That's where many of the submillimeter galaxies are known to lie. But we're also finding intrinsically rare objects that are pushing to higher redshifts, like redshift 4, 5, and above. You can actually see the one here on the bottom panel labeled Z equals 5. This galaxy is at such high redshift and so dusty that it's barely detected in our deep JWST images and only detected in the reddest band at 4.4 microns, which is truly quite extreme, and to me suggests that there are many of these objects out there that we've missed historically in deep UV optical surveys. What I'm doing is taking this effort and organizing it around this central collaboration that for now we're calling Scuba Dive. So called because we're diving into these scuba sources with interferometric data and matching them to JWST. And it's really a growing team. There's a lot of people here at UT working as a part of this. I've put their names, I put a lot of those team members here, postdocs, soon to be faculty, also graduate students and undergrads. It's a really exciting collaboration to dig into, digging into this exquisite data set. And like all good collaborations, we have a logo, which is a work in progress. Here, basically, the criteria for joining is, do you have a photo of yourself as a kid that we can put on our Scuba Dive logo? But in all seriousness, the people really make this collaboration. It's a really great group of people to work with, and I'll talk about some of the work that these various team members are doing. Early on, we found a really interesting source. This is Aztec C71. It's a very rare galaxy. It's at about redshift 6. And what I find so compelling about this source, and why I wrote a paper on it late last year, is that prior to JWST, this galaxy was not detected by any of the deep data in Cosmos short of 850 microns. So not measured in deep HST ACS imaging, the deep ground-based imaging we have in Cosmos, not even detected by Spitzer at 24 microns, which some of these dusty sources really tend to be. However, this was a bright, easily detectable source in single-dish submillimeter maps. So it was bright in Scuba 2, bright in Mambo, easily detected by Aztec, and ALMA. It took a minute to measure the dust emission in this galaxy by ALMA. Right, so it's a really bright infrared source, but historically we have not been able to measure the near-infrared properties of galaxies like this until now JWST, and in particular Cosmos Web has come along. This galaxy got a lot of press, which was kind of exciting, international press. One of the really funny things is that in the interview, I referred to it as a monster, and I think the press really ran away with that term, and they used a bunch of AI-generated images to kind of come up with what monsters might look like, in the universe, and came up with this image on the right, which is now more common to find on the web than the actual science images on the left. But nevertheless, it was funny and a fun experience to go through, even though this obviously looks nothing like what we expect these galaxies to look like. But the really interesting thing is trying to find more of these sources, right? So that's just one galaxy. It's right about there. This is a color magnitude plot showing the difference between the two F277W and F44W magnitudes. It's a function of the magnitude in the F444W band, right? So this is a near-infrared color magnitude space. And we have hundreds of thousands of galaxies in Cosmos Web. So it's a rich data set to mine and search for more of these rare, distant, and dusty objects. So you can see Aztec C71 it's fairly red. It's redder than most galaxies in this survey, and it's pushing to the fainter end. Jake McGee, who's a postdoc here at UT, has been doing a lot of work in understanding how this color magnitude space can be used to select galaxies based on their redshifts and attenuation. So that's what these kind of tracks are showing, basically progressively redder and higher redshift galaxy model spectral energy distributions. And now that we have the full sample of Scuba Dive, what we're finding is galaxies sort of across this color magnitude space. So we find many sources around where we expect galaxies to lie. If they're at like redshift 2 and they're moderately dusty, that is in line with where we think most submillimeter galaxies lie. But as you see, as you push to the top right-hand corner of this plot, we're starting to find those objects that are redshifts 4, 5, 6, and above, and are extraordinarily dusty. I think this is super interesting because remember, many of these sources were never detected below 850 microns, which means we haven't really had good handles on things like their stellar mass and even their redshifts before being able to combine the submillimeter data with JWST. And what we're finding is potentially many more of these sources than we thought. So this figure on the right is an excellent figure from Ariana Long's 2021 paper that summarizes the number density of submillimeter galaxies as a function of redshift. Well, it's really the number density of massive star-forming dust-obscured galaxies. And you can see at redshifts 4, 5, and 6, the prior data, prior estimates on how frequent sources like this are, these massive dusty and distant galaxies are, exhibits about 2 orders of magnitude. But this red square is the preliminary number density that we have from our initial scuba dive results. And you can see it's on the high end of it's right in the middle, maybe on the high end of the distribution relative to the literature. I think we're ruling out a scenario where these objects are extraordinarily rare. But it's really interesting because after all, to date, we've only been doing this archivally. So I've just been grabbing as much archival data as I can off the archive, which means I don't yet have all of the ALMA data over all of the submillimeter galaxies. I think we're missing many of those higher redshift sources that will fill in over the next few months as some of the ALMA programs complete. But what that means is that this red square is really a lower limit. We've only been able to analyze about 25% of the SMGs in Cosmos Web yet. So we have some ALMA time in cycle 10 to follow up the remaining 500 sources. And I expect this number actually to increase as we uncover more of the galaxy population space. And the reason why I think we're going to find many more distant galaxies is because most of the Scuba 2 sources that we've been able to follow up so far in the archive are the brighter end of the population, kind of between 4 and 10 millijanskis. But the redshift greater than 5 discovery space really lies in those fainter submillimeter galaxies at like 4 millijanskis-ish and below. And that's where we're pushing into with new data. So I expect to uncover many more dusty and distant galaxies, and that has profound implications, for instance, on how efficiently you can grow dust in the early universe, and of course what that means for shaping the star formation. Those galaxies would lie in the top right corner of this plot, presumably, as they're very faint and they're very red because of the dust attenuation and their distance. And one of our students here, so this is, so I'm going to show some work done by Lainey Gammon. She was here at UT this past summer for a summer REU, and she's digging into this population of just very red galaxies in the Cosmos Web data. So just kind of looking at galaxies in that shaded region. And what she's finding is a bunch of really interesting sources that drop out of the F150W band. So we're not seeing them at 1.5 microns, but they become, but then we see them in the 2.7 and 4.4 bands, and they're actually quite bright in F44W, relatively speaking, because the SEBs are rising because they're so red. What Lainey is finding is these galaxies like I'm showing here on the right. This is from her work. And basically, they're moderately dust-obscured sources at redshifts 4 to 6 on average, with AVs of about 1 or greater. And this is super interesting because none of these galaxies were ever detected without JWST. So they're not detected by Hubble, they're not detected by any of the deep ground-based imaging, but they're high redshift and they're dusty. And this is in line with some recent predictions. Here I'm showing the relationship between the stellar mass of a galaxy on the x-axis and the obscuration fraction of star formation on the y-axis. This is from recent models that came out like a week and a half ago. Out of galaxy simulations. And what these new models that are doing more careful treatment of dust are finding is that at redshifts of 5, for instance, galaxies are expected to be, star formation in galaxies is expected to be much dustier than what we see in typical galaxies today. So basically, the green curve is a factor of 2 to 5 over the black curve, which is an empirical calibration based on galaxies today and out to about cosmic noon. So the simulations are telling us that the universe might be a lot dustier than we've previously supposed. And certainly we're finding sources in Cosmos Web to corroborate that claim. Another subset of these galaxies are these so-called little red dots. So this is a sample in Cosmos Web that Hollis Aikens, a grad student here at UT, is really diving into. These are, redshift 7 to 8 galaxies with high AVs. They're dusty, but they have interesting SEDs that have possibly, blue slopes in the ultraviolet, and then reddened optical and near infrared. So it's some combination of unobscured and obscured star formation. These might even be hosting early obscured supermassive black holes. So there's many approaches to this problem. There's many interesting subsets, and really digging into this dusty galaxy population in the early universe is teaching us a lot about the dawn of dust. And what I think we're finding so far is that the first billion years of galaxy formation is really potentially much more dust obscured than we've previously thought. This is driven by both, observations across the electromagnetic spectrum, comprehensive, starting from the sub-millimeter data, like what Scuba Dive is doing, but also from these projects that are digging into just the JWST data and using that to select, high redshift and dusty objects too. Okay, so I mentioned, the dawn of dust. Now I'm just going to transition to talking about, is dust always the same, right? Because we're finding dust in these distant galaxies, but we need to rely on models that are largely calibrated in the Milky Way to connect the dust to these galaxies' star formation and to properly account for it in, for instance, the near-infrared derived stellar masses. And this is really important because dust is playing a fundamental role in many areas of astrophysics. We know that dust attenuates light and needs to be corrected for at short wavelengths. This is an essential property of modeling galaxy spectra, right? So this figure on the right is from Charlie Conroy's 2013 review paper, and everything in the top 2 rows is all the ingredients that we feed into galaxy models, and dust is really an absolutely important component of those models. But nevertheless, dust is historically simplified. It's often unconstrained, and I've seen infrared SEDs and equivalently dust obscured star formation rates with really sparse sampling of the far infrared. So we need to understand how dust really fully plays a role to fold it into these models of galaxy spectra, for instance. We know that dust heats gas and sets the thermal structure of the ISM. That's what I'm showing here on the right. So this is like a textbook plot, right, showing the heating and cooling rates as a function of density in interstellar gas. And what I've highlighted in red is photoelectric heating from small dust grains. And so photoelectric heating from these dust grains is really the dominant way that the ISM is heated across orders of magnitude in density. So dust is incredibly important for setting the thermal structure of the interstellar medium. But this photoelectric heating rate is actually known to vary, but nevertheless, it's always kept fixed in subgrid models. So this is, we see it vary both in models of dust grains, but also in the interstellar medium. And when you flicker photoelectric heating on and off in galaxy simulations, you can see strong impact on the star formation rates. So that's what I'm showing here. This is the star formation rate as a function of time in a galaxy simulation, and turning the heating on and off from dust grains really drastically changes the star formation rates. So you need to understand dust to understand how it impacts star formation. We also know that dust grains catalyze molecular hydrogen formation, which is, of course, a key ingredient for star formation. And that's why, for instance, dust emission along the Rayleigh-Jeans tail is an excellent tracer of molecular gas masses. This is, some examples of that from Nick Scoville's work. And then finally, and I won't talk about this too much, but the planetesimal community, so forming planets in protoplanetary disks, is also having this incredible reckoning with dust, because it turns out that dust is absolutely important for setting the initial conditions for growing planets. So dust is really playing this important role, right, on all scales, on galaxy scales, all the way down to growing planetesimals in disks. But to build up some, so we need to go out and we need to measure dust. And that's why the infrared is a really great place to work in, because it has so many empirical tools to characterize dust in distant galaxies. So this is actually a real spectrum from the Circinus galaxy that's on the top left. This is one of the only full far infrared, near, far, and sub-millimeter spectra that we actually have for a galaxy. And you can see that it's a rich diagnostic playground to go and measure properties of dust. The continuum is built up from cold dust, warm dust, hot dust, and a little bit of residual continuum from old stellar populations. What I've highlighted in red is the emission from polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. These are, broad features associated with planar, planar carbonaceous small dust grains. And what these let you do, combining all of these diagnostics, let you measure things like the size of dust, its average electric charge, the temperature of grains, and also the composition. And what I want to briefly touch on is these polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. If you look at the longer wavelength bands, you see larger dust grains. And if you look at the shorter wavelength polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbon features, you see smaller dust grains. So being able to look at these PAHs gives you a handle on the dust grain size distribution. Spitzer was really excellent at measuring these bands. So here I'm showing some work from the GOALS survey from Sabrina Stairwald's paper in 2014. And you can see those broad features are attributed to these polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. And JWST is unveiling these features in exquisite detail. This is Thomas Lai's work from local galaxies, again, looking at using these PAH bands to diagnose the properties of dust. And what I'm really excited about is some work, is a program that I have on the JWST that is surveying these dust features at high redshift. So this figure on the left is an example spectrum of what you have at z equals 0. This is what we have for galaxies like GOALS, combining data from TUMAS, Akari, and Spitzer. But at higher redshifts, we're missing this really key wavelength gap at around 3 microns. And so this program that I have with JWST is filling in that 3 micron window to study all of the important dust diagnostics and features there. The end goal is going to be 40 galaxies at redshift 1 to 2 with rest frame 3 to 12 micron spectra, combining JWST and Spitzer. This is a really great data set because it spans a range in star formation rates and supermassive black hole strengths. And we're going to be able to use these observations to pick apart the properties of dust grains and better understand the growth of supermassive black holes and the growth of stars in these distant galaxies. I really wanted to show you all some brand new JWST data. I got this email earlier this week saying that the observations were scheduled, and you'll notice they're scheduled for today, January 31st. And in fact, I think they'll be taken, an hour from now, a little under an hour. So sorry, under an hour away from the first spectra, which is super exciting. So I don't get to show you real data, but in the spirit of this, I'll kind of highlight what we expect to measure and what we're going to use this data for, right? So this is z equals 0 spectrum from 3 to 12 microns, and there's so much information here. You can measure H2O ice opacities that tell you about water ice depletion onto the surface of grains. You can use this 3.3 micron pod, which is what we're going after specifically with JWST, to measure the small grains in galaxies. We can fold these into the longer wavelength pods to get diagnostics on both size and neutrality. And then finally, we have absorption features from Spitzer, measuring, for instance, the silicate opacity to get the silicate fraction of these grains as well. We might detect really strange stuff like bracket alpha and carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide absorption. That's going to be really incredible. But all of these are really just giving us new diagnostics on the size, charge, and composition of grains in the early universe for the first time. What we're going to use these features to do is to, one, put them on model grids like I'm showing here on the left. which is the ratio of pause at 11 to 7 microns on the y-axis, and then 11 to 3 microns on the x-axis. And the model grids here are changing the ionization fraction of the grains and the number of carbon atoms in those grains. You can see we've only really been able to put redshift 0 galaxies on this plot before, but hopefully over the next few months we're going to be putting high redshift galaxies here for the first time to diagnose the ionization fraction and the size of these grains. And this is going to be really important because lines like the 3.3 micron PA are going to be some of the best ways that we can diagnose dust in the very early universe. So here I'm showing a MIRI spectrum of a SPT source. So this is the 3.3 micron PA at redshift 4.2, which is incredible, a new window into dust physics at early times, but we need this reference sample at redshift 1 to 2 in order to make the leap and contextualize what we're seeing at higher redshifts. Right. So dust is playing this fundamental role in many areas of astrophysics. Star formation in galaxies is overwhelmingly obscured by dust for most of cosmic time. And I hope you take that away and are interested in this problem, because it's an exciting one to be working on. There's many areas to make progress. I think the early universe is really dustier than we think right now, and it's an exciting time to be diagnosing that dust and understanding the way that it shapes galaxies. So thanks for listening to me. Thanks for staying on, and yeah, just happy to take any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much, Jed. Fantastic talk. Do we have any questions from people in the audience? Any details that people are interested in? You can raise your hand or speak out directly. I don't know if we have any, or everything was very clear. We don't have any takers. I have a couple, but
you and I talk all the time, Daniel.
I'll ask then. So for me, one of the most interesting results that you showed, is you are detecting these super dusty galaxies beyond redshift 4, 5, something like that. And you say that what you measure is a lower limit, because of the biases of not really fully sampling the. So how, based on the estimate of the biases, between the distributions that you see in in between the redshift distribution and the selection, how high that point can go?
I think, right. So what Tanya was asking about is here, right? So, right. So it's really this upper limit. I think it could be almost an order of magnitude higher, basically, based on this, right? Yeah. Like we really haven't dug into the hundreds of sources that are on the fainter tail of the SMGs. Now, many of these might just turn out to be a little less luminous, still at cosmic noon-ish, maybe redshift 3. So it's entirely possible that there isn't a dramatic increase in the number density on these sources. But I'm curious, and I think there is room, given the relative balance, as you said, between the selection functions and the distribution and fluxes that we've really been able to dig into currently, that this will creep significantly higher.
And is there any, because I imagine that those shade regions are models, predictions?
Yeah, right. So these are model predictions, but they're tied to Ariana's work, where she tries to link the dusty galaxy population with the massive quiescence at later times. So it's also tuned to the quiescent galaxy population. So if you start to increase the number of dusty galaxies, But and I guess to be fair, and something that Ariana is really digging into right now is actually, do we have a good number density on quiescent galaxies at redshifts greater than 3? And so that's also an important place to match, right? Because if we end up finding more quiescent galaxies, then we're going to need to find more dusty galaxies, perhaps, to explain that, assuming, of course, it's a progenitor population.
Are these semi-analytic models or
yeah, this is a semi-analytic model that Ariana Long has developed.
So in that sense, do you have a grasp of what would be the scaling relation or the equation that would need to be modified within those semi-analytic models to
yeah
push that that up? Is
yeah
like I don't know if they include the formation of metals in some meaningful way. Or
no, it's a little simpler than that. Ariana's next door. I could go knock on her door and ask for more details. She'll give you a better answer than I would. But my understanding is that it's also a function of the duty, basically the quenching time scale. There's sort of like a quenching time scale that is at the core of this model, and that's something that, you know, obviously is sensitive to the relevant physics, right? Are you how are these galaxies quenching? Are these dusty starbursts really just like right at the peak of their star formation histories, and then they'll deplete and stop and immediately join, or rather quickly join the quiescent population? Or is there more wiggle room there than we think? So it's the quenching time scale, which touches on, you know, your favorite way to quench galaxies, you know, AGN feedback, star formation feedback, etc.
Yeah, and I believe that, I mean, already this point that you are showing, this lower limit already, you know, rules out many other models or assumptions in the models, right?
Totally. And I think it's just extra interesting because of all the parallel projects that we're digging into that are only looking at the JWST stuff, where, you know, we maybe don't have the deep submillimeter coverage to find, you know, a ULERG at redshift 6, or right, but like sub-LERG galaxies at redshift 5 that are dustier than we think are, you know, an equivalently mass galaxy should be in the local universe. I think we're seeing also evidence for lots of those. But that's a different population, right? That's not going to, those aren't going to build to the really massive quiescent sources at this epoch.
And also, I didn't know that you were or collaborators of you were working on the little red dots.
Yeah. So this is, yeah.
Is there anything? I'm curious about because you glance over a little bit. Is there any? You say they have a high AV, no? Is this related in any way? Is there any connection with them harboring supermassive black holes, or was this because this was not expected, no? In when by finding.
I mean, it's a little difficult to some degree. Like, we actually see, so little red dots are this like enigmatic population with this uncertain blend between star formation and black holes. Some spectral follow-up has certainly found like broadline regions in these galaxies.
Yes.
So we know some subset have growing supermassive black holes. Whether or not the obscuration is happening on the torus level or on the, you know, host galaxy scale is something that I think really isn't understood yet about these sources. It's been really difficult actually to detect them in the far infrared or submillimeter with ALMA, because I think they're not LERGs, they're sub-LERG, but you know, there's still evidence for substantial obscuration in the red near infrared SEDs. And so certainly some of these are harboring growing black holes. I think they're an interesting population to kind of fit into this overall picture, though. Like, you know, what are these like the earliest forms of like the more massive starbursts? Will they really ramp up to be those like redshift 6 massive booming star forming galaxies? Or will something like this kind of quench itself because the star formation or AGN feedback is so extreme, and they might be like the less massive yet quiescent population that we know starts to be in place at redshifts about 4.
Is any of these included in your ALMA follow-up? Or they are too high?
Maybe serendipitously, but not. So Jorge Zavala, Jorge led a program that was specifically doing millimeter snapshots of things that were basically in the top right of this parameter space. So Jorge's program took like 300 galaxies there, which is where many of the little red dots live because they're so red in the 277 and 444 bands. But I don't think we've seen any data from that program quite yet. So we'll have to see. And also, I mean, I think, yeah, if they're sub-Lurg, then, you know, you might really have to drill down to get a continuum detection.
Yeah, even, yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone has any other question? That most people are not dust. They don't work with dust.
Yes, yeah, but I've hoped I've convinced you to at least. So, okay, so even if you don't work with dust, but if you go out to, you know, extragalactic astronomy talks and you hear people talking about high redshift galaxies, like, please just be the person who's like waving the dust flag and saying, what about the dust? How does that impact your observations? Because I think it's very important.
Yes, indeed.
As Tanya would agree, for sure.
Biased, but again.
Biased.
So, okay, if I don't know, last call for questions, but I think that none in the audience have. So, okay, we'll finish here. I stop the recording. Thank you very much, Jed, for the talk.
No, thank you for having me, Tanya. Thanks for staying up later and delaying your gin and tonic break.
That's okay. There can be another occasions. Okay.
Okay.
I'm gonna stop.